My name's Beth Davidson. I'm a long-term local resident. I've been a member of CFA for something like 35 years and also a founding member of Anglesea Community Network and the Community House. And this is a partnership between all of those agencies. But I will start actually by a traditional acknowledgement of our traditional owners and thanking them for their custodianship of our land, and throw to our captain of Anglesea Fire Brigade, Noel Foster, to give us an official formal welcome.
All right. Thank you everybody and welcome this morning. It's good to see a full house. It's been a great time getting this together. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the Wotherong people as traditional owners of the land. I want to acknowledge their traditional practice and how they cared, whether it be for the water or how they use the current landscape. And also to thank them for leaving the community, or leaving the land how we find it today, and it's up to us to actually look after that community. More importantly, I want to welcome any Wotherong past, present, future, and First Nations people in the room. Little story for you. So the Anglesea Fire Brigade's been running for 85 years, so it is, and we actually have a new satellite station up the top. And when we were actually getting that all ready, people asked us about what we're going to do to acknowledge the past. And rather than just putting a sign up, we thought a bit more about it and just getting some words on a board to actually find out from Wotherong people what fire means to them from their perspective rather than our perspective of fear. So we learned that it was all about healing, care, medicinal, cooking, life, looking after the country, all sorts of different reasons. So it's a bigger thing than what we see it as. We also asked them how we're going to encapsulate the community within their vision of fire, and they actually come up with this beautiful piece of artwork which depicts all this. So this is the sun rising in Anglesea, down onto the heathland, and these are the people, the community all around, and this is where the animals roam around, do all their thing every day, and where the water, where the river meets the ocean, is where they obviously fished and set up all their communities. And this green incorporates where they actually cared for country by doing fuel reduction burn, whether it be cool burns so that they could get fruit and vegetables, or hot burns to get the animals out to draw them for hunting. So that's all encapsulated in that. And we thought, so how do we actually get that into what we do? And we discussed it and brought up about community, and that's why we're all here today. We've got CFA volunteers in the community, we've got community who trust CFA, and then we get community who actually look after all of ourselves. So the word Nuniata is actually the Wotherong name for trust, and that's why today we're launching our new t-shirt. Show for anyone in the room with this. They're CFA members who wear this with pride, and with the community, whether it be ACN, Fire Brigade, we're all part of different groups. We're all here to get a link and look after each other. So if you see anyone in the street wearing this t-shirt, that's the story behind it.
Thanks, Noel. Thanks very much, and it's just a lovely story and about how some organisations pay more than lip service to the relationship with our First Nations people. So welcome here today. We have with us today a number of experts. We're all experts in our own life, but experts with regard to emergency management presentations. And we've got Peter Ashton, who we'll be hearing from later on. That we have Nick Guyot from the Shire, so if you've got Shire issues, Nick's your man. I mean with regard to fire. And Birgitta from, I get mixed up with who's with Forest Fire Management and who's with DEECA. But yeah, that's right, with the department. So join me in welcoming those people to come here. As was said, ACN has originally been arranging these sessions. We've been doing that for about 5 years, and we do it because our mission is about having a well-informed and connected community, able to share skills and resources effectively and respectfully. We haven't been frightened of hosting the difficult conversations, and we believe that our community deserves a space where the diversity of views can be explored And I've already declared my long-term commitment to emergency management issues. So ACN this year has partnered with the Community House and with Anglesea Fire Brigade in our commitment to have a better informed and safer community. Now, you may or may not be aware that Anglesea and Aries Inlet are rated as the most fire-prone areas in the state and possibly in Australia and in the world. And this year we have a particularly focusing, I would like to call it, seasonal outlook. The Chief Officer has been on a range of radio stations, television, whatever, but I'm finding worryingly that people in the community say to me they haven't seen it. And the seasonal outlook this year is concerning. Severe rainfall deficits, particularly in the southwest and the northwest of Victoria, have us with the lowest on record deep soil moisture levels. This drought stress has caused a significant increase in abundance of dead fuel component in the near surface and elevated layers in the forests, woodlands and heathlands. There may be extra bark shed and significant dryness in coarse woody fuels. A wetter spring or early summer may temper this, but will unlikely fully ameliorate this fuel structure change. And that means that there is a higher chance of large fire activity in these areas during the 24 and 25 fire season. That's a direct quote from the Chief Officer of the CFA. So that kind of gave us extra impetus to want to talk with our community this year. We know that from what the Chief Officer tells us, that all of the climate measures are tracking the same way as those leading up to Ash Wednesday. And for those of you who were here around that time, we know what happened in that part of the world. Now, some people say, they say that every year, you know, what's different this year? But I can promise you they don't say that every year. In fact, last year you were encouraged to undertake your property preparation in the same way as you are every summer, just part of our good practice. But the seasonal outlook last year was pretty benign, and the messaging at the time reflected this. So, you know, the messaging this year is taking us into a new space. Now, from my point of view, that rather than alarming us, how do we use it to motivate us? So, given the context that we're operating in, it's our intention to really help to motivate people to think about what we can do on our own properties. Nick and particularly Peter will talk about what the agencies are doing in the bush around us, all of that area that I spoke about where there's so much risk. There's a lot of work has happened out there. The place where a lot of work doesn't often happen is on our properties and in our town. So we're here today to try and help you to understand how what each of it does can make a difference. And while what we as individuals do mightn't have influence over whether or not a fire starts, we can have influence over its consequences. What we do matters. And that's the message I hope that you can take away from today. What each of us does matters. So today's session will build on the previous presentation by Peter from Forest Fire Management and DEECA, and that presents the research and data in a way that makes sense of us, to helps us to think about it in new ways and to look at our immediate environment with fresh eyes. It is PowerPoint heavy, but I encourage you to ask questions as we go if you've got a burning issue. And at the end of Peter's presentation, we'll be joined by Captain Noel, Steve Cameron, Nick, if it's relevant, for any queries that you might have. And then we'll tell you about proposed follow-up activities into the future, and we'll tell you about the green waste vouchers that you can collect later on. So enough from me, to hand over now to Peter to hear from him and all of his work. So join me in welcoming Peter.
Thanks, Beth. My name's Pete Ashton. I work for Forest Fire Management, but I guess a little bit about my background. My role is what they call a Bushfire Risk Officer. So that gives me a little bit of space to actually look into some of the kind of underlying fundamentals of fire and try and improve not only community but how we do business as well in terms of an agency. I did start my life with Parks Vic, so I have a kind of a long sort of background in ecology and land management. I still find that as a kind of major focus of my work and how that relates with fire. And once you're sort of in the sort of fire business, you realise that these things are just linked intrinsically, and it's worth thinking about that in the greater environment. And so this presentation is, I want you to think about the physics of fire here, not that this is a black box and I'm scared every time there's a bad fire day. I want you to pull it apart with some of it, and I'm going to provide a bit of background information about that. So what we'll do is we'll get into it.
So, Pete, can I just jump in? We're also recording this as well, so if you ask a question, you may be recorded, but if you've got a drama with that, let me know and I'll pause it.
So I gave this prezzo last year, so if you were here, it's a lot of the content's the same, and my jokes will probably be the same too. But I like starting with this slide, and it follows on really well from what Noel said. These two paintings were painted around 1850, and they depict two different groups of people, obviously. But you can see the top group of people is in Tasmania. They have a total understanding of fire. In fact, it's one of the big tools they have in their sort of toolkit for kind of managing land and their lifestyle. Got this other group of people who go crazy, like the world's going to end, we run around like, you know, headless chickens. So I guess on your journey and the journey of the whole community, like we're actually being forced to take ourselves out of this into this. And it's partly because we live in this environment, but it's also partly that the landscape and the climate is changing around us. So we need to take those steps to move from that group to that group. So hopefully this is kind of part of that journey. Right, I also, a couple of little openers, I like this one as well. And this is the Wye River fire back in 2015, the photographs from Lorne. And we used it a lot when I was at the Shire working with Nick, because it's an interesting, like if you start to think about what these people are thinking. So I put it down to three things. So some people won't even realise it's a fire. And you think that's weird, but my neighbour, we were living at Forest at the time, and I went and showed my neighbour. He's looking at the cloud and nothing. I said, that's a fire, Dad. No idea. I could not believe he couldn't see it, but some people can't. So then probably the bigger group will be, oh, someone will come and tell me what to do. And then very few people will be, oh, I understand fire, I know that's 16 k's away, I know there's no wind change, whatever it is. You need, as a community, we need to take ourselves into that third group there. We need a basic understanding to understand our risk and uncertain days. I pulled this little quote too from some surveys from the CFA. There's still an overwhelming majority of people think, you know, the CFA will turn up at their house and protect their house. That's just simply not the case in sort of these big devastating fires. We need to actually, the other thing I'll add to that, there's Dave Roberts who works with us, he coined this phrase, it's a team sport. We can't have just one operator, the CFA, saving us all. We have to look after ourselves, and what we do actually on our own properties also helps the CFA. And these people are amazingly brave to put themselves in front of these fires. And I've got some images that'll help you get an understanding of what they do for us. Right, you might be thinking, why is there a picture of a ball tyre up here? But ideally, we need just to put fire as just one of those bits of risk in our life, and we have heaps of them. And a lot of them we're really familiar with, and we just work out little processes to deal with it. But for some reason, fire, we just think it's this faraway thing, it's mean and scary, and we just never do it. So I'll give you two examples here. You know, if you're living sort of, let's say it's in the middle of Melbourne, there's a park, you're probably not going to walk through there at night, because you understand there's a risk element there, and you simply don't put yourself in that position. Same with your car. I mean, if your tyre's looking like that, you know, and you go driving on wet roads, you know there's a risk associated. It's already tuned in there. So what we have to do is start to understand fire in that context too. And it's pretty simple. Once you get the basis, or a few of the basic physics of fire, you'll know when you are in danger and when you're not, and when you have to take a bit of action. So let's go back to the start, because we often hear we live in the most dangerous part of the world for bushfire. And why is that? And you can see on this map, down in the Otways, there's the sort of dark red and the black, and then you've got the up and the Alps there too, is the other bad area in this part of the world. Well, we'll just go through them, and we tick all the boxes essentially. So we live in a temperate climate, we get lots of rain in winter, and it grows lots of vegetation which becomes fuel for fire. The other important part for devastating fires is we live in rugged terrain. So fires actually ramp up and do a lot more things, if you like, and we'll get into some of those. And in our climate we have periods of drought. We all know that. We're going through maybe not what we call a drought, but definitely this sort of long, sort of extended drying period over the last couple of years now. And that also includes, we have sort of low humid environments here in the middle of summer, which is very common. And then on top of the climate, we have weather, and that's where we get these bad fire days. And we all know them. Strong northerlies, hot temps, and then and sometimes wind change. And on that side, there's sort of local features as well. And I'll show you a little slide next, and it's about that wind change, which is a real feature for us. Strong northerly, and then a strong dry southwest wind change, and that's really dangerous time. And then on top of that, you throw population in here. So this is a graphic from the bomb on Black Saturday 2009, which is kind of our worst fire day we've seen. So the colour represents the temperature of the day, and you'll see the arrows represent the wind. So it's a strong northerly, starts getting hot during the day, and then this strong southwest wind change pushes through. Now luckily for us on this particular day, it came through reasonably early, but if that had come through at 5 or 6 o'clock at night like it did at King Lake, and then that's a really elevated risk factor for us. So it's not just about understanding the fire danger of the day, and we'll talk about that. There's then these other things. Once you understand the fire danger, and then you might go, wow, do we have a wind change today? That's another factor. So how does that play out? So what we're looking at here is, on the left-hand side, is house loss recorded over the last 100 years, and the bold number was the number before the 2019-25 season, and in the square box is just the house loss for that one season. So you could look at that and go, wow, geez, we're not very good firefighters in Victoria. But the reality is we probably have one of the best firefighting forces in the whole of the world, maybe with the exception of the Californians and potentially the Canadians. But what it tells you is we're right in that prime area where fires actually become devastating bad. We just have to understand that. The benefit of that is we live in a temperate environment, so it's nice. We have 4 seasons, we have nice summers. What is interesting here, if you look at New South Wales, 1,300 houses, then they lost 2,400 in 1 year. So it tells you something about demographics, but it does tell you something about climate as well. That also relates to life loss as well. The numbers match pretty closely. In fact, if you look at the stats, it's about 18 houses are lost to 1 life. And I just put, this stuff comes from a report from CSIRO, and I think these are all available, these, if you want to drill down into them. But I like circling these two here, because one's talking about people who lost their lives in structures, and the other's in the open air. And often what this relates to is people wait and see, and then the thing that arrives is just overwhelms them. Their mind cannot comprehend what they're seeing. And I don't believe even firefighters could even comprehend what they're seeing on these really bad days. And so they flee at the last moment, and that's traditionally one of the highest sort of reasons people lose their lives in fires.
Can you just explain the colours, please?
So the red ones are firefighters, and it's broken down by male and female. So the dark blue being male. Often what happens is males will stay, and the females will take the kids and they'll go somewhere, and that's probably why that number is higher. So we have this fire danger rating system. I hope everyone knows about this. It's probably your biggest, most valuable tool you've got, because you can look it up and go, righto, do I have to worry about it today? So does everyone know what today's fire danger rating is? Because it was hot and windy last night. So, and I was thinking, geez, I should know. So I woke up this morning.
Pete, Noel was just saying, we asked me about what the fire danger index would have been last night, so.
Even last night was 25, 52 winds.
Yes. So it's interesting. We've changed from this system. We'll get back to that in 1 second now. And this is a new system, so they broke it down. Officially, we're in moderate. But what Noel's getting to is that's based on combining grass and forest, and it wouldn't have taken in the wind last night. So we probably went up into the high overnight. So these things, and this is a little bit of a feature that we're getting. Traditionally, we would expect fire in the middle of the day, in the hottest part of the day, but now we're actually starting to see these sort of unusual overnight fire events. So this is also something you should keep in mind. But if you haven't got the emergency management DEECA, you need to get it. You can easily go on the front page of it, find out what the fire danger rating is for the day. You can set it up so it'll give you notifications in a certain area. You can get notifications for all sorts of things like shark attacks, but you could actually turn those shark sightings, you can turn those off. But it's a really important tool and you should have it, especially when you're down here. So anyway, obviously there's a strong correlation to life loss to how bad the fire day is. Now, this is the old system, so you can, code red is still the same, and that's a day like Ash Wednesday or Black Saturday fires. And then the extreme sort of takes in both severe and extreme now. You can see most of the life loss is there. So if you know when these days are coming and you get yourself out of the way, then you've basically taken most of your personal risk out. We'll talk about your home in a minute. So it's a pretty easy thing to do.
Hey Pete, and I'm going to interrupt occasionally because Pete's really good at translating science, but I reckon, you know.
They're too nerdy.
No. But what I was going to say is, you know, those extreme and code red days, we kind of know it instinctively. We can feel the weather today, and there's the old CFA crackle test where, you know, members would go out and they'd literally just pick up leaves and twigs or step, and you can feel it like hanging out your washing, or, you know, it's a great drying day. So I think there's that instinctive connection to the landscape that we're kind of disassociated with, and it'd be great to start turning our minds and start talking to other people about, feel the weather today, because we should be a little bit more aware on days like today and leading into summer in particular.
Yeah, and I think that goes to that point I made at the start, trying to understand kind of the physics and be involved in it, not just kind of rely on these specifically, but understand the environment. So it's a good example of that. You can see these days don't happen very often. So the new one, catastrophic, 1 in every 5. And we basically haven't had a real one, a really bad one, since Black Saturday. We've had some that have just touched in for short periods of the day, but we haven't had that real extended day. We've had hours in there. So it doesn't come around often. Like when that day comes up, absolute no-brainer, not to be here, basically. It's much tougher when you get into the other one. So awareness then becomes a bigger key, and then you have to decide at what point you're going to do something in all of this. And I should say there's lots of information out there, and CFA have programs that help you write sort of your own personal fire protection plans. We're not really going to go into that today, but use these services, they're there, and they're really willing to help people. It's hard to get people engaged, so there's, you know, the agencies will be here straight away trying to help. Go down, we look at the other two, so we're talking about 5 or 6 days a year of the next sort of code down, the next level down. So it's just about understanding when those days are here.
And Pete, another question, or a good, could you just go back and just, where was the FBI or FDI for the Y River 2015 file?
So it was about right here. And by the time it hit town, it was in here. So when the landscape is dry, this goes to what Beth was saying, it's very flammable, doesn't take much for that energy from the leaves and stuff to be released. And that was the case in 2015. So if there's an established fire particularly, it'll burn very happily in these lower. The thing about, if you do get a fire in these lower ones, there's more chance you'll be able to suppress them. So that's part of the equation too, but once they're big, game changer.
And that's what the AFDRS, or the Australian Fire Danger Rating is trying to say it's what happens if a fire starts on a catastrophic day, how will that fire behave? And it's going to behave pretty catastrophic.
Catastrophically.
If fire starts on an extreme day, it's going to be extreme bushfire behaviour. That's pretty much what it's saying. So if you've got a fire that starts and it's an extreme day, then
Yeah.
it's extreme bushfire behaviour.
I remember one of our colleagues, they did a burn at the back of Aries Inlet, and there was a guy who backed onto the forest, stayed home that day with his kid just to watch. And they were overwhelmed by how big and hot the fire was, and that was a fire danger rating of like 3 or 4. So if you're talking about numbers, we're talking up over 100 at that end. So someone's overwhelmed, like this is much bigger than they thought, and it's right down the bottom end. So don't think you'll understand this thing when it arrives. Just
So the spectators stand for whenever you're doing a burn.
yeah, I mean, it's actually a very interesting thing to have a look at to sort of get your head around what actually happens and how volatile a sort of landscape is.
And we know that when we do burn piles or even a campfire and you're standing there and it's like it's hot. So we do know fire, like we've got this in our instinctive filing cabinets, you know, in our brains. So it's really leaning into that space as well.
So we, Beth touched on this as well. We throw in the climate things now, and so this we had a sort of a risk that we had to manage, in the last few decades, and this risk is actually growing. So in this graph, you can see fire danger rating days from they model it back to 1870 through to it's around 2000, pretty stable. But then there's this jump in the last 20 years. And we've seen that in fires. I like this quote at the bottom. So you had to go back to basically 1850 to find one fire that had burned 1 million hectare footprint. I mean, there's been other years that have had multiple fires, but we've had 3 of those since 2000 now. So that tells you something about the climate as well. And you can see that, so the bit there is actual, so you can see there's been a step change, and then the last sort of step change is it's a modelled step change about the future climate. In sort of, when we were kind of getting evidence together for the start of the season and how you set up operationally, and that might be the summer crew, and these are big decisions, there's lots of money involved in this. We started pulling together some data to sort of help inform the decision. And so these 2 graphs here, the middle one's about deep soil moisture. Beth touched on that. And the red line, so this goes back to 1900. The red line is 1983, so you can see there's an actual step change in underlying dryness. So this is the sort of model. There's a model for soil moisture sort of from 1 metre to 6 metres. And we use that one because it fluctuates less. It gives us a sort of bit of a slow burn understanding. So you can see not only is there's a step change going on there for whatever reason, you can see the last little tails now push down under. So that doesn't tell you, that tells you there's underlying dryness. Now we could have recent rain and they'll be sitting on top and not show up here. But it sort of feeds into the picture. The last graph there is, you can get these data sets of climate variables, but this one's relative humidity. So the moisture component of fire is really important. If things are dry, they just burn better. Like water takes a lot of energy out of the system, both in the air and in the dry vegetation. But what this one is showing us is, I sort of mapped out how many days sort of per year do we have where the humidity is below 20%, which is dry. Like our worst fire days are probably, 10%, but once it goes below about 30, it's really starting to dry out. Like things can burn easily. The vegetation's not holding much of that atmospheric moisture. So you can see that step change also plays out there too. So these are things that I think they're sort of forcing us into sort of, building our understanding and sort of adapting, essentially.
And Pete, I'm doing it again.
Go
So
for
we've
it.
had, say, 3 years of La Nina, which is about, that blue line is that correct?
Oh no, that's the disturbing thing there. So La Nina's dropped up, but it's still bouncing around a kind of low level.
Yeah. And I think that's another point is we have had 3 years of La Nina, which, obviously didn't make that much difference. But, we've had 3 years of pretty easy bushfire seasons. And in fact, kind of pretty bad summers, you know, like, it hasn't been great beach going weather. So we've had that reprieve, and it's just a fluctuation of seasons,
Yeah, we tend to get our really bad fire seasons on El Nino events, which we had sort of last year but didn't play out. But that gives us sort of broad landscape drying. This year what we're seeing is a little bit more patchy, but it's actually quite dry out there. So the actual fundamentals of what we've seen in the past are changing as well. And I didn't know this, but I heard the 2009 fires actually happened in a week one in year, and that's kind of where we're at the moment. But we don't have that sort of real extended drying that happened back at that period.
Eddie, would you mind just picking up on that last point you quote there around the fire thing, not just the fire thing?
Yeah, so I popped this in there because I had, and we'll probably hear from Steve a bit later, Steve's involved in sort of a broad kind of spectrum of emergency management, but there's a whole bunch of other things going on in the emergency management world. But this heat one, and it's obviously associated with drying, climates and fire, but it's actually, for us as a community, the heat component is very, very dangerous for us. So it's about, we're talking about adaptation to fire, but I guess there's a whole bunch of other things we need to sort of get our heads around too. And none of these that we can't overcome. It's just about sort of facing up to them and then working out strategies for it. This one's about looking at house loss and how far away it was from the forest, and there's a strong correlation with that. And this graph and map works quite well in Anglesea, where there's really defined boundary between the urban area and the forest. It's less clear when you get to Aries Inlet, and the forest sort of bleeds its way into the township a little bit more. But what we find is if in any one fire, 80% of the loss of buildings will happen within 100 metres of the forest. And that's for a few reasons. It's because a lot of the embers are short distance embers, and also you get that sort of radiant heat and convective heat near the forest, essentially. But what this also hides a little bit is firefighters can't generally operate in that 100 metres. It's too dangerous, especially on really bad conditions, bad fire days. So what you'll find is that they're operating back 200, 300 metres, and so they're putting those buildings out. So that's sort of hidden in there. If we didn't have any firefighters, if everyone left the town, you'd probably find that this would be a little bit flatter. So don't think that if you're not in that 100 metres that you're not going to get the impacts of sort of ember attack, basically at that distance back. Also actually plays out for life loss too. Most people lose their lives quite close to the fire front. In the map we tried to map kind of this graph to the township, and this kind of assumes fire is coming from every direction. As we know, this would only be on one side if the fire was coming from here. But it just gives you some idea that if I'm in that area, I have to think about my house planning slightly different than I do if I'm in the orange or the yellow bit. The nice thing about Anglesea is it's a more rounded shape, so it leaves the centre of town further away from the forest and less risky, if you like. Whereas if you go to Aries Inlet, it's much narrower. It's more confused about where would be a safer area there. So that is, a bit fortuitous for this township. What this graph talks about, so this is about prescribed burning. So you'll know living here there's lots of prescribed burning at the back, and that it's partly to reduce fuel loads, but it's also partly to sort of just keep reinvigorating the country, so you get this turnover and renewal and productivity. But what this says that we came up with a fire plan about how much fire and prescribed burning we could put in the landscape, that one we could operationally deliver, and that was tolerable to the community, basically. So if we can bring that in, and sometimes it's difficult because of weather and just interacting with the community, if we can bring that in, we reckon we can lower the risk by about 30 to 40%. In Anglesea, that will actually be a bit higher because the burn boundaries are nicely placed around the town. So what means in essence is that 70% or 60 or 70% of the risk lies within the town. And that's the bit that you can actually influence over. So we talked about, fire arrives, how do houses burn down? So I think there's this perception that the fire will arrive and it'll just go through town in this big wall of fire. And there's probably rare examples where that happens, but mainly it's through ember attack. And to break all this down, you don't have to read it all. Essentially, 90% of houses are lost. Embers either fall on the house or mainly on the garden. It's much easier to light up garden through an ember as it compared to a piece of wood. Some houses where the front actually arrives, and we will have some in Anglesea like O'Donoghue's, those houses on that side of the road, they will have probably a flame front arrive at their house as an organised flame front. So they have to think, if they want to actually invest in trying to protect their house, they have to think about it slightly differently. So it's all horses for courses where you are within the township. But just know that you can do something about embers. They land and they start small fires essentially, and often they'll stay small, and we'll see some bits of video about that. So if you know that, you can do some basic things around your house that actually kind of give it the best chance where that fire flame can't get to something on your house. So there's two examples here. The first one is in New South Wales, and I like it. It gives you an understanding about the fire front and that sort of short distance ember attack. So these are firefighters in a truck. They've got the sprinklers on. Well, what's interesting, the fire front comes to the road, and you'll see the kind of ember attack I'm talking about. Now, a lot of these, they're glowing, but they won't light fires. And this is, this is only 10 metres from the fire. So as you go back further, that number thins out generally. Now, this is not that bad a day. This is probably like last night, or maybe a bit hotter, 35 degrees, but 30 km an hour wind sort of thing. I'll play the next one. This, just before I set that going, this is Kinglake in 2009, and we often make a joke about this, but the real video has firefighters in there and they're swearing, because they can't believe what they see themselves.
He put this on yesterday, and I was like,
so I cut that out and I put the wind on the background, so it sounds more dramatic. But the thing to look at when we look at that one is, yes, it looks overwhelming, but just have a look at the size of the fire. Think about that as it's in your garden, and how would you actually stop that getting to your home? So I totally dubbed this wind in, but it's probably pretty realistic. So lots of fire, but not big fire, right? So it looks scary, but you've got to try and put it in context. This is in the middle of the day, 3 o'clock in the day, right here. So it's not designed to scare us and get all fearful. It's totally the opposite of the outcome of today, but it's just about thinking about the physics of, when these things land, what does it do? Now, I should say Kinglake, that's kind of the worst fire hit day we've ever had, and that was right in a high impact zone, right? So all of Anglesea is not going to look like that. I always debate whether I keep this in or out this video, but it's kind of a cool video. But I guess disregarding sort of the firefight, just have a look how the fire's propagating. Just to kind of build up your understanding of what's going on. So this is in grassland. Generally we don't see a lot of spot fires in grass. This will be really long grass, and I think what happens if the fire burns it off below and then an unburnt bit floats off. But you'll see
it comes from the farmland. Phalaris is a typical example of the seed head being lifted. The stem gets burnt off, but there's enough convection to lift the seed head, which will be alight. Carbon some distance away.
Yeah, grass lights up pretty easy, doesn't it, Fabian? You can see here it's come into a sort of forested bit, right? And there's quite a good break there, but you'll see how it propagates on the other side.
Do you know how long it's taken to get to that stage?
I think
It's 4 minutes, it said.
Yeah, so very quick. This is very dry. Conditions up on the tablelands in New South Wales, this bit. it's nearly finished, but it shows the helicopter flying off, and you sort of see the sort of the longer distance embers. But yeah, these things, once it's arrived, these things happen quickly. So, and it goes to decision making, and if you do go through emergency management plan, they will talk about that sort of stuff.
So, I think also with your long distance embers, what distance are we talking?
Well, we saw at the Beaufort fire an embers up to 16 k's away. You would have seen that, but there are not many of those, and a lot of those on that particular day were put out. It's generally as it gets closer that you get sort of more mass spotting events. So either right there or back some, maybe a k or two. I do have some sort of slides that talk to that as well. The other, a little bit of where you have the wind change and you have this big ramp up in fire, you can often get this mass long distance spotting event happen too. So just to put that in perspective.
So Pete, does that mean on our emergency apps, we should be thinking of places like Winchelsea and Rome for on a bad day? Like for setting up zones in Winchelsea, so you get an alert there's a fire in Winchelsea?
Absolutely. I'd put your zone back 30k. Because if you can pick something up, you know it's a bad day, you go, right, I've got a little bit of time. Because I've got a demo of Ash Wednesday here, but it might take 5 hours. So if you are aware early, then you've got a whole bunch of time to think about it. You have to build in how busy this road will be and things like that. But yes, I agree. Go back a distance where it makes sense. You go back too far, you'll get every notification going around.
Yeah, I understand to that because when we talk about bushfire risk, everyone thinks it's all about the forest, but it's actually it's natural environment for sure, but it's also our built environments and townships. We've got a really unique social risk here along the Great Ocean Road. We were down at Wye River yesterday, and I drove through Lawn, and the traffic on that day was just, the roundabout. So that social risk is actually part of your risk planning. Like that's just what we know, and this is one of the reasons we love living down here, but at the same time it brings a lot of other people to enjoy the space. So that social risk is very much part of a bushfire risk profile.
And the sort of temptation is to complain about it, and the same with trees along roads. I hear all the time, oh, they should be cutting more trees down. And maybe they should, maybe there shouldn't be as many tourists here on bad days. But there is, and you just have to plan for that.
Pete, can I just want to illustrate something here. And it'll go to what Pete talks about later on. All this fuel is connected. And that's what allows that fire to spread. Can I go back? Yeah. So look here. Ember lights up a spot fire about here, which I noticed. It then burns out. What that's telling me is there's no connectivity between that little patch of vegetation there and its neighbours. So keep that in mind when we get into what you're going to do with your own garden. So it's sort of about here. Yeah, there.
The backing edge of
And then
it stops.
and then it goes out.
The backing edge of it stops.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Pete.
So this is a Wye River example. So we lost a lot of housing in Wye, like 120 houses, and by rights we shouldn't have, because the day wasn't that bad. It was a bad day, but it wasn't like a Black Saturday type of day. The main fire front hit the ocean, so that most of the habitat would have gone out to sea. If the front had to come straight into town, we probably would have had a different outcome, even worse. So essentially, it comes into town, and a small number of spot fires you can see up here, and that's because the flanking fire got to some hills, ran up the hill, dropped in, was over. So essentially what happened, and this goes to what Nick was talking about, there's lots of connected fuel in Wye River, and the fire was basically able to move around as a fire front. Small, flames probably only that high on average, but it was able to move around, and there was connected fuel all the way to houses. And here's an example. You've got sort of grass beyond that, and then you've got mulch that allows the fire just to come up to the house. And that, if it actually got to this house, the fire might be that high. It just burns through the mulch, gets to the boards, burns the house down. Now that would be easy just to stop, just to take a little bit of fuel away from the house. And I would hazard a guess in Wye River, if every house had a combustible bit around the house, it would have limited the house loss by, I'm totally guessing, but maybe 80%.
So you'd replace that mulch with gravel, would you?
Gravel? Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard when you've already built your home, but in this case, that would be easy to do.
Yeah.
It's painful when you have garden and you go, oh, I don't want to remove it, it's taken 10 years.
But you wouldn't have to do it far,
No.
even that far out from the house, say on that one there.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. 1 metre would be,
Yeah.
that would be fine there. You just have to think about it then when you have, you know, 1 metre might not be enough if you want to have a big sort of shrubby area there. So it's just about matching those things up. We'll talk about that. This house is what they call a Bell 40. So if anyone's built a house since 2009, you would have gone through these new regulations. So there's in Bell 40, there's no timber on the house, but even here it's really bad design. Like they've got a garden right up against the house. Now that garden lit up these sort of composite boards, and they actually caught on fire. But as the heat came out, they self-extinguished. But if you're going to build yourself a $700,000 or $800,000 house, this is the time not to do that. So there's some really bad examples, and there were actual Bell 40 houses burnt down. So they built these houses and then put sort of combustible stuff underneath. And basically you need a flame zone house if you're allowing flames to directly sort of sit against the house. So again, where are the sort of key components that break down in a house? And windows account for a lot of them. And because most of our buildings until recently were just the plain, you know, annealed glass, that stuff breaks pretty easy. So for instance, you just have a panel of glass and you've got a little garden bed outside, you don't need much of a fire near that, because if you heat up a section of the glass, it tries to expand, of course the rest of it's cold and it breaks. As soon as it breaks, an ember goes inside and all our stuff, you know, carpets and chairs and stuff burn very easily. So what do you do if you've got all windows? Well, you just have to move the vegetation back from it. So that would be a key starting point. A lot of these other ones, so some of it is about what they're constructed, but a lot of this is around how leaves and stuff build up in the houses, in front of doors, doormats, roof valleys. They're classic for leaves building up. So this goes to kind of that maintenance component of your house, which is very important. Got this little video is up on Warringamba Drive in Canberra, and actually we drove through there the other week and it was quite fascinating to have a look at. But again, you know, a lot of houses burnt down in Canberra in 2003, I think it was. But have a look, most of the fires are low. There's some where it's got into some shrubs and pencil pines, and they're the things you have to identify and go, right, that's the thing that's going to give me a bit of grief. But otherwise, the fires are generally pretty low. So it's got into some shrubs. Now you can have shrubs, but you just don't want that against your house. If it's 10 metres away, you're probably fine. If it's against your neighbour's house, you're fine. It's also, as a classic, you know, we have lots of those brush fences here, and they're just terrible things, like, because they light up like that. So it's about going, well, actually, maybe I need to take a few of those panels out and have steel or something, you know, rusty steel or something next to the house. So the idea is just think about the mechanics of what's going on. Then when you look at your place, you go, oh yeah, that thing would actually cause me a bit of grief. You don't have to read this, but this is Wye River data. So of the houses built after 2009, that's under that Bell standard, you would have heard that word. And then before that, there was another standard, not quite as strict. But what we found is, you know, these houses were burning down. They're supposed to be built to resist bushfire. And what that goes to mainly is, you can't just build a house and walk away. You've got to do the other things. You've got to do the garden things. You've got to maintain it. Yes, I've got a picture of that too, Faye.
There's this great temptation because it's a great storage area, isn't it? You do it in winter, but and in Wye River it's a case of firewood underneath. It's like crumbling under a house. Surfboards, wheelie bins, boats, whatever.
This is a reconstruction, so we have these kind of fancy fire models that we use to predict fire. So on a day, the models will be run, and that helps with the operational response. It also helps with the communications to community about, you know, what communities are likely to be impacted and when. So this is a reconstruction of Ash Wednesday for those who sort of don't know exactly what happened there. But we'll say it's the classic case of the strong northwest wind followed by a really strong southwest wind change in this case. So the fire starts over at Dean's Marsh. We'll let it run. It goes reasonably quick. So you can see when it gets to the forest, it starts spotting ahead of itself reasonably quick. And these tall forests are, they're prone to throw longer distance spots. So the fire runs into North Lawn and it sits there for a little while because the northerly wind's still blowing. And then the southwest wind change comes in, really dangerous time, and it's picked up in the model quite well. And then it runs into areas inlet and eventually arrives in Anglesea. And this model over predicted what happened, but essentially got it pretty good. So the technology for this sort of thing is getting good. Not only, so the models are used not just for predicting on the day, but they're used to help inform the prescribed burn program. So it might start like 60,000, you know, simulated fires and have these different patterns of burning in the landscape, and then we see, well, what's the potential house loss difference from not having the fires or having some prescribed fires, and that's where that graph comes from. So there's an equation around house loss, and that's kind of the main measure in there. So these next slides go to the kind of demographic sort of changes. So what we can see here is red houses in Fairhaven, Moggs Creek, and then we've got Anglesea there, were burnt down in Ash Wednesday. Greenhouses survived. I should say there was a prescribed fire, or it might have even been another wildfire the year before in here. So I think essentially what's happened, stopped the run of fire, but embers have come over the top and run backwards to it and got those over there. And this is the new houses we have today. So the problem hasn't gone away. In fact, we're looking at a probably extended problem.
Got hard copies of those pictures as well down the front, so you can have a look. Finding house.
Wish you were here.
And that's Anglesea. And by the time the fire arrived at Anglesea's a bit different. The conditions would have been starting to abate. But this part of Anglesea back in 1983 would have had a lot of natural heathland through it. And the fire, and I've got some photos actually, it probably more had a frontal fire going through there. So it's probably unlikely to happen to that extent if the same thing arrived. So this is Aries Inlet. A lot of infill in Aries Inlet. The other thing is, it's kind of vegetation change. Like our sort of sense of place, I guess, here is drifted towards being in the bush and having the birds and things around, and that's meant we've actually actively planted lots of things in our gardens for good reasons. But in 1983, I suspect that probably wasn't, people's sort of sense of this place wasn't built mainly around that, I'm guessing. I mean, I've cherry picked kind of the areas that have the greatest change, but you can see areas there. I've got Road Night here. And you can see it's sort of infilled there, there's lots of gardens. Now that actually, if we planted that, you know, sympathetic for fire and for birds and other fauna, that actually could be a better situation. Could be a worse situation too, depending on how it's being planted in. Because that here would actually carry sort of little fronts of fire in there as well, which is less likely to happen there, and it's exactly what Nick said, the landscape is now broken up, so it needs embers to propagate over these breaks and start again. And when they have to start again, they don't have the same energy. And slowly they run out of energy, and that's why you don't get fire, you know, going right into the middle of towns, generally speaking. The other problem in all this is there's a lot more houses. I use Aries Inlet as the example, but in 1983, the average distance between houses was about 16 metres. Today it's about 8 metres. You can see Anglesea here. Most of that change probably came from the road night area. But I used this red line, the 12-metre line, and it was something CSIRO scientist Justin Leonard pointed out at Wye River. He thought that beyond 12 metres it was unlikely one house could burn down the next one. So you can see now we've got more houses, we've got changing climate, and they're closer together, so this sort of house-to-house sort of fire losses is another component to think about. But it's just about understanding this stuff and adapting. It's not about throwing their hands up in the air. Don't have to read this one either, but there's lots of data out there around vegetation and how it interacts with houses. And all this is being distilled into some great guides by CFA and from the Shire about planting and things like that. And the sort of house advice service, Tony might touch on that a bit later, but the principles they use come from a lot of this learning over many years. I've got just a few slides about, so each fire is a little bit different as it arrives in the town. So this is Malakuta in 2020. This, in my mind, is an example of a short distance ember attack. So the fire itself, it's left a lot of the crowns on the tree, so it's not really intense fire, it's pretty bad. But it's from lots of short distance embers. It hasn't lit up the forest on the other side. And you can see those embers have probably got into gardens or things lying around the house, and they've burnt the houses down, but they haven't impacted the trees. So we'll talk about trees a little bit, but just because there's a tree there doesn't mean it's going to explode in a ball of fire. In fact, it needs quite a lot of heat underneath to get a tree to ignite, and that's why they talk about these ladder fuels and then clearing vegetation below the tree. The tree's biggest issue in my mind is all this stuff that it drops, and we can take care of that stuff. I put this last little photo in because I really like it. That's a mulberry tree there, and this is in 2020, big drought, and the person who owned that house decided they didn't have much water, but they would water the mulberry tree, try and get it to survive. And as it turned out, that when you see the other photos, it's a massive tree, covers the whole back of their house. It probably saved the house. And you know, introduced trees, a lot of them, they have a higher moisture content. They're really good for deflecting embers, and they don't catch on fire that easily. So in that instance, save them. Quickly, just on that sort of mass short distance ember attack, this is I've got to do a reconstruction of the Dereel fire this year. This is a fire running through a previously prescribed burn area. You can see there's limited ember attack. There's some longer distance stuff, and that's because there was probably ribbon barks there. Then after the wind change, it ran through an area long unburnt, and you can see as it came into the sort of the built up area, lots of embers. There was lots of CFA people who defended every house there, which is incredible when you look at it. But you know, having done the work around the houses there, that actually helps, you know, CFA defend your
And
house.
can I say as well, that was because they were actually all in another fire, which wasn't so far away. So when Dereel started, suddenly all of his aircraft could be, and firefighters could be redeployed. So it's not a usual scenario.
No, it was an amazing turnout of equipment, basically. So this is more back in our own backyard. So there's that picture of Anglesea, that's O'Donoghue's Road there, and to me it looks like the actual fire ran through as a semi-organised front through there, and that'll be because, you know, back in that time, a lot of heath through the blocks there, and like what Nick was saying, not many disruptions. This is King Lake. Again, this is a surface fire right through the town, and again, it's in a semi kind of urban area, so again, less sort of disruptions, and the fire's allowed to kind of travel through as an organised flame front. But you can see here, even there, most extreme circumstances, a house can survive. Marysville, 09, this was a disaster really. 70% of the town was lost. This is an example of a kind of, I guess what's termed this kind of mass ember dump. And in really big fires, you get these massive columns, and they usually form going up long, steep hills. Of course, when they get to the top of the hill, they've got air rushing in. They could be 100 k's an hour plus, and they've picked up all sorts of burning stuff, and they're sitting up in the column, and then on its downhill run, there's not as much energy, and it falls out. If you happen to be in the wrong spot, this is what happens. But again, look at the trees. They haven't ignited many of the trees in town. It's probably that mass ember attack on the gardens. And there will be some direct ignition as well. Wye River, this one is about the house on fire. It was on fire next door, and you can see the radiant heat on this house. It actually caught on fire from the radiant heat rather than a flame. Firefighters were there to put it out. But if you look to the other side of the window, the right-hand side, hardly any damage at all, and that's because there was a tree in the way, a shrub, a mirror bush, which we call a weed here. But pretty good for bushfire. So you can have these things in the landscape, and they can help you. Just have to think about how it all plays out. Just to labour on that point, I watched the Australian story about Denali when they had the fires there in Tasmania and how they were sheltered under the pier there, and I just couldn't understand how that could happen because there's just no vegetation around the town at all except sort of grass leading up to it. And then we drove through on the bus and I looked up this hill and thought, I bet you I know what happened there. Fire, exactly the same thing, race up the back of the hill, just embers on the town and just everything lights up at once. That is not as big a factor in Anglesea here because we don't have those sort of steep hills going back. Now it's different when you get basically to Aries Inlet and Lawns, even worse, because you get that opportunity for that sort of little runs of fire up the hills. This is really quickly, we've got these fancy models that the CSIRO built for us, and we can actually describe what each house looks like in terms, there's lots of levers, but some of those are garden levers, some are windows and decks and whatever, and then we can run a fire at it. And in this example, I just ran a really bad fire at Anglesea, part of Anglesea here, and just doing some basic things in the garden, according to the model, reduced sort of the house loss by about 25%.
Pretty good if you're under the 25%.
Yeah, and like to get a risk reduction of 25% is really hard. Like, you know, we do prescribed burning and we don't get anywhere near that for one burn. So to get that for your own house is pretty good. We talked about this concept of sort of breaking up the fuel. Good way to think about this is out of a CFA document. I think it's in the Shire one too, Nick. But it doesn't have to be a concrete jungle. You just have to think about it. Like, how do I position these things? Especially if you were to redo some of your garden, you might go, right, now's the time I'll do this. But you might say, oh, what can I do around my garden in terms of just small things that aren't going to sort of mess it up too much. So there's that part of it as well. But think about it in this onion ring kind of effect. That stuff right close to your house, that's something we probably could affect reasonably easy and it'll give us the biggest sort of bang for buck basically. Particularly if you're away from the edge of the forest, that's where it's all at. That has to be complemented what's in there. So like what we said, if you have a meter, you know, sort of non-combustible or low combustible, so you can put some plants in that don't combust very well, then you can't go and plant a big hunk of shrubs just here because the flames will just reach over. So you have to, it all complements each other. And you can have smart design in here. None of this is sort of concrete block stuff. These are some of the publications you can get and some sort of ideas of good. And here's an example of, you know, putting paths against buildings, low flammability shrubs, so they're saltbush, don't burn very well. And then you break it up so you don't have that continuous line of fire with different aspects of your garden. As opposed to bad, you know, stacking any sort of stuff under the house is bad. Treated pine like that is really bad. These are easy kind of wins too, you know, you don't have to have that beach there. You could replace it for a stone sort of garden bed with more succulents or sparse type of shrubs. That would be much better. But there's an example where if that flames up, even if it's for 30 seconds, that's going to break that glass almost certainly. So they're easy. There are easy wins out there, probably for everyone's house. You just need to clue into them, and you can get help looking at your house too, either from the Shire or the CFA. I will just touch on the gas bottle one. That was a significant factor at Wye River. Essentially, everyone wanted their gas bottles, you know, covered so they couldn't see them. So a lot of people put either treated pine and or vegetation planting around them. Of course, that caught on fire, heated the bottle up, and the bottles have a pressure relief valve, and that lets go, and of course that ignites. So now you have a flame that's 10 metres long squirting out of the bottle. And if that's on your house or your neighbour's house, then yeah, it's going to catch fire obviously pretty quickly. So you can like take that combustible stuff away from gas bottles. They're pretty safe otherwise, unless they fall over and the liquid inside covers the relief valve. It would be very hard to get one of those to explode. You're trying really hard. And also consider where that valve is pointing, and it's opposite to where the little copper pipe comes in.
So if you're leaving your property and you've got gas, can you go down and turn the gas
Definitely
off
turn it
before
off.
you go?
Yeah, because one other thing happens if a pipe breaks or there's a rubber component of that, then you've got gas pouring out everywhere. So yeah, that's something you could easily do. There's a bunch of maintenance things that you can do easily as well, like pull rubbish bins away from your house, take plastic furniture off your deck, remove it. So there's a whole bunch of those, and there's good literature about that you can do really easily on the day. Yeah. Alright, this is a little bit of a straw poll. Who's actually built a house or done a major reno since 2009? Right, you will, whether you know it or not, and Nick, I suspect we always thought that not many people knew it, but you'll have one of these as part of the planning scheme, and it's your bushfire management plan. Always up the front. But it sets out, these are actually conditions of your planning arrangements, I guess, if you like. So you're actually supposed to follow these, and a lot of people don't even know these exist. But in here there's some stuff around, how it's sort of necessary for the CFA, but there's some really good examples of stuff around basic sort of measures about vegetation. So if you don't know you have one of these, reach out. I think I'm safe to say you can reach out to the Shire and
Yeah, thanks for that. But
they're buried in the filing scheme sometimes miles down, so
Yep.
it takes a little bit to
But
get them out.
might take a little bit. We'll find them for you, and we can talk you through them as well, exactly what they mean.
Would we have that in our folder of stuff that we've just very neatly folded away?
Very possibly, yeah. Yep. And it will look like that. It'll be a diagram. It might be a photo, but it might be a sketch, but it'll be a design of the layout of the house.
And it would be part of all of that planning stuff?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, if you have a bushfire report, it'll be in that probably.
So it has to be.
Yeah, if you can find it.
No, that's fine. It has a weird way.
Make them earn their money. So as I was saying, there's lots of information out there, and some of it's not overwhelming either. There's some great stuff on the CFA website. Shire's got some really good stuff as well. I put in this. I've done this a couple of times now. We'll have access to this, but it's a website. You can go in and put your address in, and it'll ask you all questions around your house, and at the end, it'll give you a risk rating of your house. It's a really good place to start. So if you do come up as reasonably high, and a lot of houses in Anglesea naturally will, because you're putting in your address and it knows how far away you are from the forest, it's a good start to then go, well, all right, what bits can I improve without going too crazy? Unless you want to go crazy, but most of us, it's too big a proposition.
About 2 years ago, I received a letter from the South Coast Shire offering for someone who knew about bushfire management to come down and do an assessment and mitigate risk. And I took it up. And I don't know whether they still offer that.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
The interesting thing, he said to me, no one else had taken up the offer.
Yeah.
That's strange.
I mean, most people don't want a shy person on their land.
Actually, it's quite good, right?
But I can say that the fire guys, that's what they're there looking at. They're not there for any other reason.
We're not looking at your deck that you've built out back. But Tony Revell and his team here at local CFA, they're offering that same service as well.
He'll talk about, Tony's going to talk about that
Yeah,
later.
fantastic.
Alright, we're nearly there. Couple of takeaways. I guess, there's a risk out there, but it's putting it in perspective. It's not being overwhelmed by it. It's just like any other risk in our lives, just kind of piece together and understand it a bit better. the vegetation around your house is really important. If you want to have the biggest sort of change to the prospects of your house, it's about doing some of those little things, and including the maintenance and taking some of like the garbage bins and things like that away too. You don't have to turn your house into a concrete jungle. Essentially, you can have sympathetic planning and still get almost as good result. Yeah, I said here, it's a bit of a system, you know, like you need a personal plan, you need to manage the house, you need to think about your vegetation. It all works in together, so that's kind of the key point there. Insurance, we're probably going to be forced to do this stuff one day, if not already. It's going up ridiculous, so you do not want your house to burn down. Like, I remember, how often do people say, I don't care if my house burns down? It's an emotional thing you go through, and then you have to front up to the show and go through the planning scheme again, which is also an emotional thing.
Pete, do you have a problem with the shows?
I did work at the Shires. It is just the way the system is very complicated, as you all know. I think when we do something around a house, and even, government's a classic for this, let's not maladapt, like let's not make it worse. Let's think about making it slightly better every opportunity we get. And that's a key takeaway here. Just think about it. Because I don't know how many times, you know, councils and DEECAs and CFAs, we do silly things as well. But so we all, as a community and as government agencies, we need to do this continual improvement. And then it will happen, we won't even realise we've adapted, basically. I won't go into this, but you can look this stuff up. It's just some key takeaways, and we'll have the slide anyway. But there's much better information in this slide if you go onto the CFA website or the Shire website. Just a little bit of a rundown on just a little bit deeper dive onto this season. So AFAC put this out for spring, and it shows what Beth was saying is a real drying trend in the west, of which we're included. The new one of these is about to come out maybe next week, I think, so look out for that. But let's put this into context. Like 1983, there was obviously a bad day, but it was extended drought. So you can see here, this is the 12-month deficit for 1983, and you can see it for this year. So it's pretty bad in the west still. Not quite as bad, you know, in that sort of western part of the Otways. And then if you look at the 6-month anomaly, so we've been really dry in the last 6 months. So we're trending back to a really nasty situation. The top one shows you sort of, I think it's, yeah, root zone soil moisture, which is that top bit, which obviously once that dries out, then the vegetation starts to wilt and drop more leaves. So that's showing a drying trend as well. I like these spaghetti graphs. I stole them off a mate of mine who works for CFA. So basically what we're looking at here, I've plotted, it's a rainfall deficit map. So basically if I start at 0 January, if we have 10% less rain, or 10 mils less rain, it'll be -10. If we got 10 less the next month, it'll go down. So if it was average, it would go straight across. So I've mapped all the bad fire years there. You can see us tracking in the red, and 82 is in the blue. So in theory, in a 12-month sort of deficit, for right here, we're actually tracking along that line. What is interesting for Aries Inlet, now we think 2023 we had those wet, you know, I think it was November or December, January. Aries actually missed out a lot on that rain. I think Anglesea got some of those storms, but Aries is quite dry. So now Aries is coming in on the back of 2 dry years here. But it's not across the landscape. This is Mount Cowley up behind Bourne. And I've done this one for 15 months because I think it makes more sense in that part of the world because it gets more rain. There's taller trees, there's less sun on the ground, it takes longer. But you can see it was starting to track really badly, and then we got on the top of the range, which we didn't get here. We got these sort of rainfall events. So I think so 2008 is the yellow one, so that was obviously really dry on the range. So if you look at that, it's probably unlikely to get, you know, a landscape, massive devastating landscape fire take the whole ranges out this year, is what I'd suggest. That doesn't mean there'll be a fire, it will still burn, but generally when there's more moisture in the system, suppression is easier. There's a much better chance of actually getting on top of these things. So at this stage, it doesn't look like that is possible to happen, unless we get this sort of real drying effect from here. I haven't got the slide of it, but Cape Otway, the line is about 30 mils below the worst fire year, and they're tracking at the driest year ever recorded, and that station goes back to 1850. So there's these anomalies everywhere. So you've got this little wet section right on top of the range, and these super dry bits like Aries and the Cape. And this is probably the new well where we're going to get this sort of localised sort of drying events. But it's definitely a watch. This is one of the watch outs. We know it's leading up dry. It should be sort of stepping our kind of thinking into the next level. All right, I know this could be a bad fire season. I need to be more in tune with the day and things like that. And I think, oh, actually, I've got one more. This is deep zone soil moisture, but just for 1 point now. That other one was an averaged one, so this is in Anglesea. And you can see the deep zone is not as dry as 1983, but it's definitely on that trend down. So that to me is another kind of warning sign that it's heading that way. I could easily get there by the middle of summer as well. So hopefully we get a bit of rain leading up to summer and in summer, but it's definitely, it's a watch and see again this year. We already saw that one. That's it.
Thanks, Peter. As I said, PowerPoint heavy, but hopefully a lot of information in there that really does help to move you to understanding why we need to take action. And in fact, the thing that Pete really heartens me is that we can. There is stuff we can do. We don't need to just kind of fall into the woe is us. That, you know, I think Pete's painted a pretty strong picture that there are things we can do to make a difference. And I suppose that for me is a really big driver, because I don't want to get to March and have anything left undone. And so that's one of the reasons we're working so hard, even with these sessions, to ensure we're taking all the actions we can to have you as well informed as you can be, because together we all will be just so much safer. So, you know, that was just great to hear from you, Pete, about that, you know, how we can become far more actively engaged. I will just call briefly on Tony to give a brief thing about the property advice service that he is offering in partnership with the Community House.
Thank you. Thank you, Pete. That was great. Pete mentioned 30% of the risk reduction due to controlled burns and other things that are going on. I think that means 70%. Now, we're not going to remove all 70, but we as a community can go quite some distance down that path. In terms of taking the kind of the learnings that Pete was talking about and applying that to your garden and your driveways, your house, your trees and the like, there are a lot of simple things that we can do. And there's literature out on the desk out there and also online which does point to a lot of that. But if anybody would like some assistance in having somebody visit the property and basically apply that information and give you practical advice, through the CFA we offer this property advice visitation service, and we've been doing it for a few weeks now on a Saturday. We do it by appointment, so if you're interested in that, you need to contact the Anglesea Community House. They're the ones who will receive the request and run the schedules and let us know when we should go. So the contact details, I've got them out on the table out there, but we can put them up on the board here as well too. The other thing I'd mention quickly, we did touch a little bit on fire plans and the like, and the CFA is running 2 information sessions around town. The first one being, and this brochure is also out there, I'm just reading this, it's next Saturday at from 1 to 2 p.m. in the main shopping precinct, followed by another one a couple of weeks later at the other place of last resort, which is down on the riverbank. So if you want information that will focus on fire plans and people's personal plans and the like, try and get along with that. That's all from me.
Thanks very much, Tony. Now, Noel and Steve, was there anything you wanted to come up and say?
I'll just
No,
say something.
Steve's saying no.
Just a couple of
Yep.
points that I picked up in Pete's chat. If you are going to clean up around the house and do burn-offs, please think about the day your actual burn-off. Tuesdays or Wednesdays and Saturdays are the days. There are specific times. People, I'll just say, come downtown or we'll pick clean up around the house, we'll pick burn. It could be Wednesday, it could be Sunday. What happens there is the neighbours aren't aware about it. Some are ringing through, but not a burn-off day. It could be something for asthma, it could be clothes washing, it could be anything. Please consider what days you do it properly. On that, restrictions will probably come in within the next 3 weeks. So you probably won't have much time anyway. But get into the habit, don't think, oh, I'm doing 4 restrictions. Keep cleaning up using your green bins all the time. Have a chat with your neighbours. If they're not here today, have a chat with them, clean up your properties together. Have a cup of tea with them, talk about what you do. And if you are doing a bushfire plan, don't think about it all. Next Tuesday's going to be a fire and it's a day off work. It could be a school day, it could be a public holiday, the busiest day of the year in town, all sorts of things. Another quick one is when you do the Vic Emergency app and you see bushfire pop up, it is a bit of frustration of mine is everything comes up as a bushfire. It can be just a tiny little thing, or it can be so just if it's 20 degrees southerly, bit of moisture in the air, just don't jump in the car and drive off. Have a bit of think about it as well too. And also, I'm sorry, one more to be best from memory. Always time for new recruit talk. If any is interested in this opportunity, if any is interested in becoming part of the Anglesea Fire Brigade, I won't say CFA, it's a fire brigade because we are in town. You do not have to get in the back of the truck. You can help doing the gardens at the satellite station, you can come in and sign the help test hoses, you can do community information. Beth and Tony's got 2 t-shirts on there, he's got a volunteer one and a CFA one. You can do short courses and help deliver, just be part of the team. And if you can't be part of it, just do what Pete said, clean up around your house. You're actually helping the fire brigade by doing that. So all them little bits, as I said, all the notes make a song, and we all run the notes.
Yeah, thanks,
Thank you.
Noel. That was a great message. So we are going well to finish on time. So I'm pretty happy about that. The next steps, just to let you know on our next steps, we will be repeating this session, if Pete's up for it, on the 25th. That's only a couple of weeks away. So we thought that maybe, if there was anything you wanted to clarify or talk to your neighbours, try and get as many people as possible to come and hear this fabulous information that we have available locally in our town. And so from our perspective at ACN and the partnership I talked about, our plan is that we're doing the talks at the moment about property prep, because that's before we really get into the nasty bits. So we're talking a lot about property prep, and then we will start to move into more of the personal stuff, particularly on what to do if you're still here and there's smoke on the horizon, and why you shouldn't be here, which Pete kind of touched on as well today. But we'll move into that next phase from December the 15th. So that will be a very different session, and Steve, wherever he was from down the back, Steve will be part of running that session, which has quite a different sort of a tone to it. There was something else I wanted to say there, but it's gone. With the property prep stuff, there are, as Tony said, a number of brochures out there. ACN has been part of ensuring that we get some localised information, and has, with the support of the local community bank, thank you to Andrew Jones here, have been able to produce that, and so that's out there as well. And you've heard a lot of the information today. I hope that you're integrating it, but maybe you've got neighbours who you want to, wish had some of this information as well. So pick up the brochures, you know, give them to your neighbours. Kind of, the more people we can get doing the property preparedness, the better it is for all of us.
Yeah, but also Nick's been taping this session, so this will be on probably YouTube. We'll put out locations through ACN Newsletters, through the Anglesea Live, through any channel we can. So tell your neighbours it's there, and they can just watch it at television.
And the other thing is, we've started a little part of the Anglesea Community House website where we're kind of putting up a lot of the links, because you know people just forget which links and what. So we're trying to put some key ones, including some of the CFA stuff as well, on the Anglesea Community House website as well, so that's all there as part of it.
Ben, sorry, will that today's session be on that website as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that once Nick's done whatever Nick needs to do, so that'll be a couple of weeks probably before Nick's able to do that. But thank you very much for that for doing that. So before I just close, I found it really helpful last time to ask just a couple of questions, because we don't do an evaluation thing at the end, but just to get a sense of how many of you have been to other fire information sessions? Good, that's great. How many is this your first one that you've ever been to? That's good, so we're getting a few, perhaps that first stuff as well. Has today been informative and helpful for you? Good. Here's a tricky one. Will you take action as a result of anything you've heard today? I would hope so. And even if that action is talking to your neighbours. Are there any particular comments and or questions to any of the presenters that you would have before you go?
Just a question on the water table affected by the filling of the mine, you know, the aquifer, etc. Does that have any, I'm sure it does, but what impact does that have on the issues with the water level, not the water level, but the moisture content that we've been looking at during this?
Yeah, it wouldn't show up in that sort of model data. I'm not saying it wouldn't have a real effect later, but yeah, I don't think it would appear in that model.
Jackie?
This is for Peter, I think, really. You mentioned people planting, but it's really more removing things that start ferally, I think. You know, the coastal wattle, which I believe burns really badly, is something that just, I'm constantly pulling it out. It just comes from neighbours or wherever, or you know, the bush generally, and you could just leave your garden, it'll become bush. So you're saying that people plant stuff, but a lot of it's really just natural bush that grows anyway.
Yeah.
And so it's about how it's vegetation. The thing is, it's vegetation. It's where it is and what type it is the challenge.
Yeah, and there's some easy wins. Like maybe I'll throw it in there because the Shire have done lots of work in this space with sort of weeds and fuel.
Yeah. So I'm really pleased to hear that someone had taken. Sorry. Stand here, man. I'm really pleased to see someone took up that offer from the Shire. I used to do that role myself as well, and I don't think there's any property that I've ever walked into and said, "Nah, that's perfect." I can pick 5 things straight away that are on a range of really easy to really hard to do. And coastal wattle, yeah, it's there's a hybrid that we get in Anglesea. Coastal wattle grows on like the front dune. It's that really low, straggly stuff that you see. It gets smashed by the salt, but it's generally kept there. Then it hybridises with the one coming out of the heath, and it just grows monster in town. It can look a bit similar though, so if you're having trouble identifying it, give us a call, and we can meet you on site, or we can drive past when you're not there and talk to you about it, if you're in Melbourne or whatever, or we can, my colleagues loves yellow spray paint, so not gonna graffiti your place, but you can just put a little dot of yellow paint on what the coastal wattle is, and that'll give you an indication. Okay, anything that looks like that, yeah, we can go for it.
And secondly, is cactus against the house okay?
Cactus would be fine. I imagine
Yep.
it's full of moisture. You
It's
never
okay,
get less use.
because that's, yeah.
Yeah, and there's lots of actual
The
succulents,
succulents,
but some that aren't as obvious, like some of the salt bushes, they're quite succulent, they're full of salt, they don't burn very well, and they're in the booklet. So yeah, there's a range of plants out there that you can actually replace stuff with and not have that sort of concrete jungle effect.
Yeah, thanks, Nick, and Nick and Peter. Thank you for everyone for coming. I heard one of the speakers earlier on say how difficult it is to get people engaged. Well, I want to say congratulations to each one of you for being here, for being one of the engaged. And as I said, we've got another one of these on the 25th, and then their personal stuff starting on December the 15th. So think about those ones as well. But I want to ask you specifically to join with me in acknowledging the fabulous, skilled, committed people we have gotten in our community who give their time to come voluntarily, even if it's part of their work. They come voluntarily on a weekend to Anglesea. We have the most highly skilled people, and we've even heard from, I can't even see where he is, Fabian was chipping in before to things. Fabian is one of the best accredited fire investigators in the world, and he's part of our community and offers his services to us pro bono. And it's the same with all of these people, and of course every one of the brigade that is there every time. We no longer hear a siren going off, but every time they're required, you know, we've got so many people doing such great stuff in our community. And for those who have come today to share their professional expertise with us, I want to just say my thanks and ask you to join me in thanking them. Well done, we're done in time.